My name is Angelo Harrison, 65 years old, and I never thought my silence would save my daughter. When Sophia married that charming real estate agent last spring, I kept quiet about the $33 million Margaret left me after 30 years of marriage and her battle with cancer. Something in my gut said to wait. 3 days after watching my little girl dance at her reception, her new husband, James, showed up at my door with a notary and legal papers. If you are watching this, comment where you are from, and subscribe to hear how I protected everything Margaret worked for. The story of how I ended up with $33 million begins long before that fateful day when James showed up at my door. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school secretary. Through scholarships and summer jobs, I put myself through engineering school, eventually becoming a civil engineer specializing in infrastructure projects. During my sophomore year of college, I met Margaret Taylor in the university library. She was studying finance and economics, her textbooks stacked neatly as she worked through complex calculations. I remember asking to borrow her eraser, not because I needed one, but because something about her intense focus and the slight furrow of her brow when she concentrated captivated me. That borrowed eraser led to coffee, which led to dinner, which eventually led to 40 wonderful years together. Margaret had the most brilliant financial mind of anyone I've ever known. While I designed bridges and highways, she climbed the ranks in investment banking, eventually becoming the CFO of a regional firm. Her talent for spotting emerging markets and long-term investment opportunities was uncanny. One of her colleagues once joked that Margaret could smell a good investment from 1,000 miles away. Despite our growing financial success, we lived modestly in a comfortable but not extravagant home in a good school district. We drove reliable cars until they couldn't be driven anymore. Margaret always said, "Live below your means, invest the difference, and let compound interest work its magic." It became our family mantra, though I never fully appreciated just how seriously she took it until after she was gone. Our greatest joy came 35 years ago, when our daughter Sophia was born. From the beginning, she had her mother's sharp mind and my creative problem-solving abilities. Margaret would read investment books to her as bedtime stories, and I would take her to construction sites to show her how buildings came together. Sophia grew into a compassionate, intelligent young woman who decided to become an elementary school teacher, wanting to make a difference in children's lives. We raised Sophia with our core values of honesty, hard work, and generosity. Every holiday season, we volunteered as a family at local shelters. When Sophia received her first paycheck as a teacher, she proudly showed us how she had already set up automatic transfers to her savings account and a small monthly donation to an education charity. Margaret beamed with pride. 8 years ago, our world shattered when Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer at 58. The doctor's words still echo in my mind. Stage 4, metastasized to the lungs. Margaret faced her diagnosis the same way she approached everything in life, with clear-eyed analysis and quiet determination. "We've got work to do, Angelo," she said that night after the diagnosis, "and not much time to do it." For 2 years, we fought the disease together. Through chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments, and finally hospice care, Margaret never lost her dignity or her mind for detail. Even as the cancer weakened her body, she spent hours on the phone with financial advisors and attorneys. I assumed she was merely putting our affairs in order, making sure I would be taken care of. I had no idea of the full scope of what she was arranging. Margaret passed away peacefully at home 5 years ago. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped arriving and the well-wishers returned to their lives, her attorney Patricia called me in for a meeting. What she revealed left me speechless. Through shrewd investments, savings, and the recent sale of her family's manufacturing business that she had helped modernize and make profitable again, Margaret had accumulated over $33 million in assets, all of it meticulously structured, perfectly legal, and now mine to manage. I remember sitting in Patricia's office, stunned into silence. "She didn't want you to worry about money while she was sick," Patricia explained gently. "She wanted to focus on the time you had left together." For months after learning about the inheritance, I couldn't bring myself to touch the money. It felt wrong somehow, like accepting that Margaret was truly gone. I continued living in our family home, driving my 10-year-old sedan, and volunteering at the community center to fill my empty days. The only financial change I made was setting up a modest monthly allowance for myself. Before she died, Margaret made me promise that I would use the money wisely to secure our family legacy and help others. "This isn't just money, Angelo," she had said during one of her last lucid moments. "It's opportunity. It's security. It's a responsibility." Sophia was 29 when her mother died, already established in her teaching career. Margaret and I had agreed years before that we wouldn't disclose the full extent of our wealth to our daughter until she had found her own path in life. We had helped her through college and teacher certification and given her a reasonable down payment on her small condo, but otherwise, she lived on her teacher's salary. She knew we were comfortable, but had no idea of the true extent of the family wealth. After Margaret's death, I saw no reason to change this arrangement until the right time came. As the years passed, I found purpose in quiet philanthropy, anonymous donations to causes Margaret had cared about, particularly educational initiatives for underprivileged children. I established a scholarship fund in Margaret's name at her alma mater. I continued my volunteer work, finding that helping others was the best remedy for grief. Through it all, I kept the full extent of our wealth private, known only to me, Patricia, and the small team of financial advisors Margaret had carefully selected. Little did I know how crucial that privacy would become when a smooth-talking real estate agent entered my daughter's life. Sophia met James Thornton at a school fundraiser 3 years after Margaret passed away. Her elementary school was trying to raise money for a new playground, and James had made a generous donation as a prominent local businessman. He had come to the appreciation dinner where Sophia was giving a speech, thanking the donors. She later told me how he had approached her afterward, complimenting her passion for education and asking thoughtful questions about her teaching philosophy. James was 38, 8 years older than Sophia, with the polished appearance of someone who had spent his career in sales. He specialized in luxury real estate, with his smiling face plastered across bus benches and billboards throughout the city's affluent neighborhoods. His website featured him standing next to mansions and sports cars, always in perfectly tailored suits. When Sophia first brought him to dinner at my house, he arrived in a brand new German sports car and brought an expensive bottle of wine. "Your daughter is the most refreshing person I've met in years," James told me that night. "In my business, I'm surrounded by people obsessed with status and money. Sophia cares about what truly matters." I noticed he maintained steady eye contact when he spoke, something Margaret had always said was either a sign of genuine connection or practiced salesmanship. With James, I couldn't immediately tell which. Their courtship moved quickly. Within 8 months, James had proposed with a diamond ring that seemed overly extravagant to me. When Sophia called to share the news, her voice bubbled with excitement. "He says he's never met anyone like me, Dad. He says I've changed his perspective on what matters in life." I felt a mixture of happiness for my daughter and unease about the speed of their relationship. When I met Margaret, we had dated for 3 years before getting engaged. We had weathered arguments, financial struggles, and family conflicts before deciding we were truly compatible for marriage. Sophia and James had experienced none of that testing period, moving from initial attraction straight to lifelong commitment. The first red flag appeared during their second visit to my home. As I gave James a tour of my garden, he casually asked about my retirement accounts. "At your age, you must be thinking about estate planning," he said, gesturing toward my modest ranch-style home. "I have some great contacts in wealth management, if you need recommendations." There were other subtle warning signs. When Sophia mentioned her mother's career in finance, James quickly changed the subject. "Investment banking is such a soul-crushing industry," he said dismissively. "All that focus on money, instead of what life's really about." This from a man who, according to his own website, specialized in $10 million homes. James frequently commented on Sophia's modest teacher salary, suggesting that with her intelligence, she could be making real money in the private sector. Each time, Sophia would gently defend her career choice, but I could see these comments bothered her. Margaret and I had always supported her decision to teach, believing that finding fulfillment in your work was more important than maximizing income. After one particularly tense dinner where James had questioned Sophia's decision to spend her spring break volunteering at a literacy camp instead of joining him on a luxury resort vacation, I called my younger brother Frank for advice. "Have you suggested a prenup?" Frank asked bluntly. Frank had always been more direct than me, a quality that served him well as a business attorney. "I can't do that, Frank. It would seem like I don't trust her judgment." "It's not about trust, Angelo. It's about protection. You're sitting on Margaret's legacy." "I know, but Sophia's so happy, and bringing up a prenup might make her think I'm against the marriage entirely. Besides," I added, "she doesn't even know about most of the money." "Maybe it's time she did," Frank suggested. I considered Frank's advice, but when I gently broached the subject of the rushed engagement with Sophia over lunch the following week, her reaction made me reconsider. Her eyes had welled with tears. "Mom would have loved him, Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He makes me feel the way you and Mom were together. Don't you want that for me?" I couldn't bring myself to push further. Instead, I decided to keep the inheritance secret a bit longer, at least until I knew James better. If his intentions were pure, there would be plenty of time to discuss family finances after they were settled in their marriage. As the engagement progressed, I noticed James taking an increased interest in my living situation and retirement plans. "This house must feel so empty with just you," he remarked during one visit. "Have you thought about downsizing? There's a great retirement community I just listed properties in." When wedding planning began, James pushed for extravagance at every turn. A historical mansion venue, top-shelf open bar, gourmet 7-course dinner, and a designer dress for Sophia. When they discussed the budget with me, James looked expectantly at my reaction to the 6-figure total. "I'll contribute what I can afford," I said carefully, mentally calculating a generous but not suspicious amount from my retirement savings. James couldn't completely hide his disappointment at what he perceived as my modest financial situation. I noticed his smile tighten when I mentioned having to be careful with my fixed income. As he turned away to take a phone call about a property listing, Sophia squeezed my hand. "It's okay, Dad," she whispered. "We can scale back. I don't need all this anyway." That moment confirmed what I already suspected. I needed to be very careful about revealing the truth of Margaret's inheritance, at least until I was certain of James's character. Something in my gut, perhaps Margaret's whispered wisdom from beyond, told me to wait and watch. As the wedding date approached, tensions began to surface between Sophia and James over the budget. Despite my contribution, which I had carefully calculated to appear generous for a retired civil engineer but not suspiciously large, James continued pushing for upgrades and additions. After one particularly heated phone call that ended with Sophia in tears, I decided it was time to dig deeper. Margaret's older sister Diana came to visit that spring, staying in my guest room for a week. Diana had always been perceptive about people, a trait she shared with her sister. After meeting James at a pre-wedding dinner, she cornered me in the kitchen while helping with dishes. "That man has $signs in his eyes, Angelo," she said quietly, glancing toward the dining room where James was animatedly telling Sophia about a celebrity client. "The way he looked around your house, like he was doing an appraisal. Margaret would have seen right through him." Diana's concerns echoed my own growing unease. The next day, I contacted Walter Simmons, a private investigator who had worked with my engineering firm years ago on a case of materials theft. His office was small and unassuming, much like Walter himself, a former police detective with a methodical mind and unassuming demeanor. "I need a complete background on my future son-in-law," I explained, sliding a folder with James's information across his desk. Discreetly, Walter nodded, asking pointed questions about what specifically concerned me. I described James's focus on finances, his seemingly exaggerated business success, and the rushed nature of the relationship. "It may be nothing," I admitted, "but something doesn't feel right." "In my experience," Walter said, gathering the folder, "when something doesn't feel right, there's usually a reason." 2 weeks later, Walter presented his findings in a comprehensive report that confirmed my worst fears. Despite his reputation as a top luxury real estate agent, James Thornton was deeply in debt. His flashy lifestyle was financed almost entirely on credit cards and personal loans. His real estate business had more image than substance, with most of his claimed sales inflated or, in some cases, deals where he had played only a minor role. More disturbing were the patterns Walter uncovered in James's personal history. He had been briefly married twice before, each time to women of significant means, and each marriage had ended within 2 years with generous settlements. There were also records of significant gambling debts at casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, carefully concealed behind business write-offs for client entertainment. He's not just living beyond his means, Walter concluded. He's looking for a bailout, and based on his history, he's done this before. That evening, I met my lifelong friend Harold for dinner at our favorite steakhouse. Harold and I had known each other since high school, and he had been a constant presence throughout my marriage to Margaret and was godfather to Sophia. After ordering our usual porterhouse steaks, I shared Walter's findings. "You have to tell Sophia," Harold said immediately. "This guy is a predator. What if she doesn't believe me? What if I show her this report and she chooses him anyway? I could lose her." Harold set down his fork and fixed me with a serious look. What would Margaret do? It was the question I had been avoiding. Margaret would have been direct and protective, prioritizing Sophia's long-term happiness over temporary peace. But Margaret had also been better at these difficult conversations than I ever was. "I need more than suspicions and a pattern," I said finally. "If I'm going to risk my relationship with my only child, I need concrete proof of his intentions toward our family." While I wrestled with this dilemma, James's inquiries about my financial situation grew more frequent and specific. During a dinner at their apartment, he casually asked about my financial advisor's name and my estate planning. "As a family, we should coordinate these things," he suggested smoothly. "I know some excellent attorneys who specialize in wills and trusts." The next day, I called Grace Williams, a high-profile estate attorney recommended by Frank. Grace's reputation for creating ironclad asset protections made her one of the most sought-after lawyers in the state. Her corner office overlooked the city skyline, and her manner was both warm and formidably intelligent. "Based on what you've told me," Grace said after hearing my concerns, "we need to create multiple layers of protection. If your suspicions are correct, this isn't just about your daughter's potential divorce down the road. This is about actively shielding assets from someone with predatory intentions." Over the next several weeks, Grace helped me create a series of irrevocable trusts for future grandchildren's education, carefully structured charitable foundations, and other financial vehicles that would ensure Margaret's legacy remained protected regardless of what happened with Sophia's marriage. We documented every interaction with James, keeping meticulous records of his inquiries about my finances. "The goal isn't just protection," Grace explained. "It's creating a record of behavior that would be relevant if this ever became a legal matter." James's interest in my financial situation reached new heights when he made an unexpected visit to my home one Saturday morning. Sophia was at a bridal shower hosted by her colleagues, and James arrived with coffee and pastries, claiming he was just in the neighborhood showing a house. "Thought I'd check in on my future father-in-law," he said with that practiced smile. "You know, see if you need any help around the place." As we sat on my back porch, James surveyed my modest property with barely concealed assessment. I deliberately maintained a middle-class appearance, with my older model car in the driveway and furnishings that were comfortable but not luxurious. I noticed his eyes lingering on a photo of Margaret. "Sophia tells me her mother was in finance," he said casually. "Must have been good with money, raising a daughter and keeping this place up." "We got by," I replied noncommittally. "Margaret was always careful with our budget." "Smart woman," James nodded. "Speaking of which, have you given any thought to our conversation about that retirement community? I've got clients who would love this location. Great school district, up-and-coming area. I could get you top dollar." I noticed how he emphasized top dollar, watching my reaction carefully. I maintained an expression of polite consideration while changing the subject. As James left that day, his handshake was firm but his smile didn't reach his eyes. The disappointment in what he perceived as my modest financial situation was palpable. I had passed myself off as a comfortable but not wealthy retiree, and it was clear James had hoped for more. That night, I sat in Margaret's home office, surrounded by the books and papers she had meticulously organized before her death. "I think you were right to be cautious," I said aloud to her memory. "But I don't know how to protect Sophia without hurting her." There was no answer, of course, but sitting among Margaret's things always helped clarify my thoughts. By morning, I had decided to continue my careful documentation while looking for the right moment to approach Sophia. Little did I know that moment would come sooner and more dramatically than I had anticipated. The pre-wedding dinner was held at an upscale restaurant that James had selected, with a private room overlooking the city. Sophia looked radiant in a blue dress that reminded me painfully of her mother. As champagne flowed and guests mingled, James stood to offer a toast, glass held high. "To the Harrison family," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Thank you for welcoming me so warmly. I'm not just gaining a beautiful wife, but joining two families, and hopefully, two fortunes." He laughed as if it were clearly a joke, but his eyes flicked to me momentarily. A few guests chuckled uncomfortably, while others seemed not to notice the implication. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, James's father cornered me near the coat check. Donald Thornton was a loud, imposing man who had clearly enjoyed the open bar. "James tells me you were in civil engineering," he said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Good solid career, government benefits and all that. Not like my boy, though. James has always aimed higher, you know, always looking for the big score." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Between us, he's betting your family has more tucked away than you let on. Smart, keeping it quiet. Very smart." I carefully extracted myself from the conversation, my concerns deepening. The entire Thornton family seemed to view marriage as a financial transaction rather than an emotional commitment. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring Saturday. As I prepared to walk Sophia down the aisle, I found myself wishing desperately that Margaret could see our daughter, while simultaneously being grateful she wasn't witnessing what was unfolding. Sophia was breathtaking in her white gown, reminding me so much of Margaret on our own wedding day that my eyes filled with tears. "Mom would be so proud of you," I whispered as we waited for the music to signal our entrance. "I feel her here," Sophia replied, squeezing my arm. "And I'm so glad I still have you, Dad." Walking her down that aisle was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Each step felt like I was leading her toward an uncertain future that I couldn't control. When the minister asked who gives this woman in marriage, my voice nearly broke as I answered, "Her mother and I do." The reception was held at a historical mansion that James had insisted upon, despite its exorbitant cost. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and a 10-piece band created exactly the impression of wealth and status that James clearly craved. I noticed he spent most of the evening networking with guests who appeared to be potential clients rather than celebrating with his new wife. During the father-daughter dance, Sophia rested her head on my shoulder just as she had done as a little girl. "I wish Mom could see this," she said softly. "She can," I assured her, "and she would want you to be happy above all else. Remember that, Sophia. Your happiness is what matters most to me, just as it did to your mother." As the dance ended, I presented Sophia with my wedding gift, a modest gold watch that had belonged to Margaret's grandmother. "Something with history," I explained. "More sentimental than valuable, but your mother would want you to have it." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she fastened it to her wrist. James, who had appeared at her side, glanced at the antique timepiece with poorly disguised disappointment. "Very nice," he said without enthusiasm. "Vintage is very in right now." Later that evening, as I stepped onto the terrace for fresh air, I overheard James speaking with a groomsman near the railing. "The old man's playing it close to the chest," James was saying, his voice slightly slurred from champagne. "But you don't save enough for that kind of wedding contribution on a government pension. There's money there. I just need to figure out where it's hidden." "What about your new wife?" his friend asked. "Does she know?" "Sophia's too much like her father. No financial sense at all. Teaches elementary school when she could be living the good life." I'll help her see reason once we've sorted out the family assets. I retreated before they noticed me, my heart heavy but my resolve strengthened. This was no longer about protecting Margaret's inheritance. It was about protecting our daughter from a man who saw her as nothing more than access to presumed wealth. The morning after the wedding, a brunch was held for out-of-town guests at my home, something I had insisted on hosting despite James's attempts to move it to an expensive hotel. As guests enjoyed coffee and pastries on the patio, James cornered me in the kitchen. "We should talk about your living situation, Angelo," he said, gesturing around my kitchen. "This place is too big for one person. Lot of maintenance, expenses. I was thinking you might consider downsizing now that Sophia's married. I know some excellent retirement communities. Very nice amenities. People your own age." "I'm comfortable here," I replied evenly. "Lots of memories." "Memories don't pay property taxes," James countered smoothly. "And at your age, thinking about the future is important. Medical costs, long-term care. These are things Sophia and I worry about." Before I could respond, guests entered the kitchen looking for coffee, ending our conversation. But the intent was clear. James wanted me to liquidate my assets, presumably so he could offer to help manage the proceeds. The following day, Sophia and James left for their European honeymoon, a 3-week tour of luxury hotels that James had upgraded from Sophia's original, more modest itinerary. "We only get one honeymoon," he had insisted when Sophia expressed concern about the cost. After they departed, I spent several sleepless nights contemplating my next steps. The situation was deteriorating faster than I had anticipated. James was clearly impatient to access what he believed was hidden family wealth, and I worried about how he might manipulate Sophia if his financial pressures were as severe as Walter's investigation suggested. I arranged an emergency meeting with my financial team, including Grace Williams and Patricia, Margaret's longtime attorney. Together, we created additional layers of protection and documented James's concerning behavior and statements. "If he continues on this path," Grace warned, "we may need to consider having a direct conversation with Sophia sooner rather than later." The day after the meeting, I found myself driving to the cemetery where Margaret was buried. It had become my habit over the years to visit when faced with difficult decisions, finding clarity in the peaceful surroundings and the feeling of connection to her wisdom. Sitting beside her headstone, I spoke aloud as if she could hear me. "I don't know how to protect her without hurting her, Margaret. You would know exactly what to say, exactly how to handle this. I'm afraid of losing her if I tell her the truth about James. But I'm more afraid of what might happen if I don't." As always, there was no answer but the gentle rustling of leaves. Yet somehow, I felt a sense of resolve forming. Margaret had always believed in facing difficult truths head-on. She wouldn't have hesitated to protect our daughter, even at the risk of temporary conflict. When Sophia called from Venice that evening, I noticed a subtle change in her voice. There was a distance that hadn't been there before, a careful quality to her responses when I asked how they were enjoying the trip. "It's beautiful," she said. "James has some business contacts here, so we've been doing some networking dinners." She paused. "He's been asking about Mom's family business." I told him I didn't know much about the details of the sale after Grandpa died. "Was it significant?" The careful way she asked told me James was likely nearby, possibly even suggesting the question. "Your grandfather's business provided for your grandmother's retirement," I said neutrally. "But that was a long time ago, sweetheart. Are you enjoying the gondola rides?" The subject changed, but the seed had been planted. James was digging for information about family assets, using my daughter as his proxy. The time for careful observation was running out. I needed to be prepared for what would happen when they returned. Sophia and James returned from their honeymoon tanned and seemingly happy, though I immediately noticed subtle changes in my daughter. Her clothing was all new and designer labeled, significantly more expensive than what she had typically worn on a teacher's salary. She wore new jewelry as well, including a diamond bracelet that she unconsciously touched whenever money was mentioned. I invited them to dinner at my home the week after their return. James dominated the conversation, describing the luxury hotels they had stayed in and the business connections he had made in each European city. The suite in Rome had a private terrace overlooking the Colosseum, he boasted, refilling his wine glass. The hotel manager upgraded us when he heard I was in real estate. Said I absolutely had to see a property he's developing in Florida. Connections, Angelo. That's the real currency in this world. Throughout dinner, I noticed Sophia's smile seemed fixed, her enthusiasm slightly forced. When James announced they were looking at homes in Lakewood Estates, an exclusive gated community with prices starting at $2 million, her eyes flicked nervously to me. That's quite an investment for newlyweds, I observed carefully, especially on two bridge incomes. It was a gentle reminder that Sophia's teaching salary and James's commission-based income wouldn't typically qualify for such an expensive property. We're thinking long-term, James replied smoothly. Property in that neighborhood only appreciates. It's not just a home, it's an investment in our future. We haven't decided anything yet, Sophia added quickly. We're just looking at options. When I asked about their budget and financing plans, James provided vague answers about creative financing and leveraging current market conditions. I noticed Sophia growing increasingly uncomfortable, fidgeting with her napkin and changing the subject to her upcoming return to teaching. After dinner, while Sophia was clearing plates, James followed me into the living room. I've been meaning to ask you about your financial advisor, he said casually. At your age, it's important to have someone who understands the unique needs of retirees. I know several specialists who focus on estate optimization. I'm satisfied with my current advisors, I replied. They've served me well for years. Of course, he nodded. But sometimes fresh eyes can spot opportunities, tax advantages, better yield strategies. I'd be happy to review your portfolio, family helping family. His persistence was becoming more obvious, less carefully disguised behind concern. Over the next several weeks, James began visiting me alone, always with some thin pretext about picking up items Sophia had left or dropping off mail that had been sent to my address. Each visit included some discussion of my finances, my home's value, or pointed questions about Margaret's family. During one such visit, he mentioned that he had noticed I sometimes seemed confused about financial details. It happens at your age, he said with false sympathy. Sophia and I have been talking about how we might need to help you manage your affairs before anything falls through the cracks. I recognized the strategy immediately. He was laying groundwork to suggest I was experiencing cognitive decline, potentially setting up an argument for him to take control of my finances. I carefully played along, letting him believe his manipulation was working while documenting every interaction. When I called Sophia that evening to invite her to lunch, just the two of us, she seemed evasive. I'm really swamped with lesson planning, she said. Maybe in a few weeks? Is everything okay, sweetheart? I asked. You seem different since the wedding. Everything's fine, Dad. Just busy with the new house and all. James is handling most of it since he knows the market better than I do. New house? So you've decided on Lakewood Estates? There was a pause. We're in escrow. James says it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The owners are motivated sellers. After we hung up, I contacted Walter Simmons again. I need to know if they've actually purchased a home and how they're financing it, I explained. Within days, Walter confirmed my fears. James and Sophia had indeed entered into a purchase agreement on a $2.4 million home in Lakewood Estates with a minimal down payment and an adjustable rate jumbo mortgage that would require monthly payments far exceeding their combined income. Meanwhile, my financial team discovered that James had been researching Margaret's family business, particularly the sale that had occurred shortly before her death. He had contacted former employees and even the acquiring company, posing as a financial journalist writing about successful family businesses. Increasingly concerned, I increased security measures at my home and with my financial accounts. I updated my will with explicit provisions regarding Sophia's inheritance and added additional trustees to oversee any funds she would eventually receive. Grace Williams advised documenting every interaction with James, including recording our conversations where legally permitted. He's getting impatient, Grace warned during our meeting. People like this escalate when they don't get what they want on their timeline. Be prepared. Her prediction proved accurate sooner than I expected. 3 days later, James arrived at my door unannounced. Through the security camera, I could see he wasn't alone. A middle-aged woman in a business suit stood beside him, carrying a portfolio. Dad, "I brought Melissa Jenkins to see you," James called out when I opened the door. "She's a notary and financial advisor who specializes in senior planning." I invited them in, maintaining a calm demeanor while activating the recording device Grace had provided. As we sat in my living room, James launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about his concerns for my welfare. "Sophia and I have been worried about you living alone, managing complicated finances at your age," he began, his tone condescending. "We think it's time to simplify things, make sure you're protected." Melissa opened her portfolio and removed several legal documents. "We've prepared a durable power of attorney," she explained. "It would allow James and Sophia to make financial decisions on your behalf if you become unable to do so yourself. This is just about protecting your interests," James added smoothly. "We've noticed some concerning signs lately. Forgetfulness, confusion about accounts. It happens to everyone eventually." I examined the documents carefully, noting they would grant immediate and broad powers rather than the conditional authority that would take effect only if I were actually incapacitated. It was, essentially, a complete handover of control of my assets. "This is quite comprehensive," I observed mildly. "I'd need to have my attorney review it before signing anything." James's smile tightened. "There's really no need for that expense. Melissa is fully qualified, and this is standard protection. We could sign today and you wouldn't have to worry about a thing anymore." "Nevertheless, I'd feel more comfortable having Patricia look it over," I insisted, referring to Margaret's attorney. "Perhaps we could schedule another appointment next week?" I could see frustration flash across James's face before he composed his features. "Of course, if that makes you comfortable. But time is of the essence, Dad. The closing on our new home is coming up, and having clear access to family resources would simplify a lot of things." And there it was, the real reason for the urgency. James needed access to what he believed were my hidden assets to cover the massive financial commitment he'd made on the house. After they left, I immediately called Grace Williams. "It's escalating," I told her. "He brought a notary to my house with power of attorney documents. Document everything, and don't sign anything," she instructed. "And Angelo, it might be time to have that conversation with Sophia before he isolates her completely." I knew she was right. The moment had arrived to reveal both Margaret's legacy and the disturbing truth about the man Sophia had married. With James's intentions now crystal clear, I authorized Walter to conduct a more comprehensive investigation into his current activities and finances. The results were even more alarming than the initial findings. James had recently contacted several estate liquidation companies, apparently getting quotes for selling household contents. He had lost over $70,000 gambling during a business trip to Las Vegas the month before the wedding. Most concerning, he had taken out 3 new personal loans in the weeks since returning from the honeymoon, presumably to cover the down payment on the Lakewood house. Walter also discovered James's online activities through his business computer, which was legally accessible due to it being registered to his LLC rather than as a personal device. His search history included queries like inheriting from in-laws, challenging irrevocable trusts, and signs of dementia in the elderly. "He's laying groundwork," Walter explained grimly, "either to claim you're incapable of managing your affairs or to position himself to contest any estate plans that don't favor him." The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. The man my daughter had married was methodically planning to gain control of Margaret's legacy through manipulation, legal maneuvering, and possibly even false claims about my mental capacity. Meanwhile, James began efforts to limit my contact with Sophia. She canceled our standing Sunday dinners with increasing frequency, always with plausible excuses about house hunting, social obligations with James's clients, or preparation for the upcoming school year. When we did speak by phone, James was often audibly present in the background, sometimes even taking the phone to say hello and then dominating the conversation. 6 weeks after they returned from the honeymoon, Sophia called me in tears. "Dad, I hate to ask this," she began, her voice shaking, "but we're having some temporary financial difficulties with the house closing. The lender needs a larger down payment than we initially thought. James says it's just a cash flow issue. Until his commissions come through next month, is there any way you could help us out?" Just a loan until things stabilize? My heart ached at the stress in her voice. How much are we talking about, sweetheart? 300,000, she whispered. I know it's a lot. James says we can put my name on your house as collateral if that makes you more comfortable. The amount confirmed what I already suspected. The minimum down payment for their mortgage would be at least 20% of the purchase price for a jumbo loan. Far more than James could manage with his actual financial situation. And the suggestion about putting Sophia's name on my house was a transparent attempt to gain access to my property. Let me look at my accounts, I said carefully. Can we meet for lunch tomorrow to discuss it? Just you and me? There was a pause and muffled voices. James thinks it would be better if we both came over to discuss it. He understands the financial details better than I do. I'd really like to see just you, Sophia. Father-daughter time. We haven't had that in a while. More muffled consultation. Okay, she finally agreed. Noon at Martinelli's? It was our traditional lunch spot, where we had gone for years on special occasions. Perfect, I agreed, already planning my approach. That evening, I met with Grace Williams and Walter Simmons to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. We organized the evidence into a clear, compassionate presentation focused on protecting Sophia rather than vilifying James, though his actions spoke for themselves. Remember, Grace advised, your daughter is a victim here too. She'll likely experience denial, anger, even blame toward you for investigating her husband. Be prepared for that reaction. The key is to be non-accusatory but absolutely clear about the facts, Walter added. This isn't about your opinion of James. It's about documented evidence of his intentions. I spent a sleepless night reviewing our approach and preparing myself emotionally. By morning, I felt a strange calm, similar to what I had experienced during Margaret's final days, when difficult decisions had to be made with both compassion and clarity. Sophia arrived at Martinelli's looking tired, with dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup. She wore one of her old sweaters rather than the designer clothes from the honeymoon, which I took as a positive sign that the real Sophia was still there beneath James's influence. After we ordered, I took her hand across the table. Before we talk about the house, I need to tell you something important. Something your mother and I had always planned to discuss with you when the time was right. Sophia looked confused but squeezed my hand encouragingly. Your mother was an extraordinarily talented financial manager, I began carefully. More so than even I understood during our marriage. When she died, I learned that through her investments and the sale of your grandfather's business, she had accumulated significant assets. Sophia's eyes widened. How significant? $33 million, I said quietly. She pulled her hand back in shock. That's impossible. We lived so, normally. Mom drove a 10-year-old car. That was her philosophy. Live below your means, invest the difference. She never equated wealth with spending or status. For her, it was about security and opportunity. Tears filled Sophia's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? She wanted you to find your own path. Establish your own identity before knowing. We were planning to tell you when you turned 35. After she got sick, we decided to wait until. I paused, choosing my words carefully, until you had found a partner who loved you for yourself, not for any inheritance. Understanding began to dawn on her face. Dad, if you're suggesting James, I slid a folder across the table. I need you to look at this, Sophia. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I love you too much to stay silent. With trembling hands, she opened the folder containing Walter's findings, organized chronologically from James's previous marriages and financial troubles through his recent activities since their wedding. I sat quietly as she read, watching emotions play across her face: fear, disbelief, anger, and finally, a devastating sadness. The gambling debts, she whispered. He told me those credit card statements were for business entertainment. And these loans, she looked up, eyes brimming with tears. The house, he said we could afford it because his business was about to close several major deals. I'm so sorry, I said gently. I struggled with whether to show you this. The last thing I wanted was to cause you pain. He's been asking about Mom's family, about your retirement accounts. Her voice strengthened as connections formed. Last week, He suggested you might be showing early signs of memory problems. He wanted me to consider having you evaluated. I nodded. He brought a notary to my house with power of attorney documents that would have given him immediate control over my finances. Sophia covered her mouth, tears flowing freely now. I thought he loved me, she whispered. I thought he saw me, the real me. I believe he saw your kindness and your trusting nature, I said carefully, and he saw your connection to me. We sat in silence for several minutes as Sophia processed the devastating truth. Finally, she straightened her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of Margaret that it made my heart ache. What do we do now? She asked, wiping her eyes. That depends on what you want, sweetheart. I've taken steps to protect the assets, so you don't need to worry about that. But how you handle your marriage is your decision. I'll support whatever you choose. Before she could respond, the restaurant door burst open, and James stormed toward our table, face flushed with anger. What the hell is this? He demanded. I've been calling you for an hour, Sophia. How did you know we were here? Sophia asked, her voice suddenly steady. James faltered momentarily. Your location sharing on your phone. That's not important. What matters is you're discussing financial matters without me present. Sit down, James, I said firmly. This is a public place. Noticing other diners watching, James lowered himself into a chair, attempting to regain his composure. I'm just concerned, he said, modulating his tone. Sophia mentioned your generous offer to help with the house down payment. I wanted to make sure the details were handled properly. There is no house down payment, Sophia said quietly, closing the folder. And there won't be a house in Lakewood Estates. James's eyes narrowed as he noticed the folder. What have you been telling her? He demanded, turning to me. More of your confused ramblings? Sophia, your father's been exhibiting concerning symptoms. Memory issues, paranoia. It's why I brought that advisor over. Stop it, Sophia said, her voice gaining strength. I've seen the evidence, the loans, the gambling debts, your search history about challenging trusts and diagnosing dementia. It's all here. James's facade cracked, his charming smile replaced by a cold calculation. Whatever he's shown you is fabricated. He doesn't want you to be happy, to have nice things. He's been hoarding family money that should be shared. Family money like my mother's inheritance? Sophia asked pointedly. James couldn't hide his reaction, the momentary gleam of interest confirming everything. So there is significant inheritance, he said, his tone immediately softening. Sophia, this is exactly what I've suspected. Your father has been hiding family assets that should be benefiting both of you. This isn't just about me, we're talking about your birthright. My mother left her estate to my father, Sophia stated firmly, and she was right to do so, given that my husband of less than 3 months is already plotting to access it through manipulation and lies. James's expression hardened. You're making a serious mistake, he said, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. I have evidence of your father's mental decline. Adult Protective Services takes elder financial abuse very seriously. One phone call would result in them reviewing the extensive documentation my attorneys have been keeping, I interjected calmly, including recordings of your conversations with me where you've attempted to gain control of my assets through deception. The color drained from James's face as he realized his position. Sophia, he tried one last approach, reaching for her hand. We can work through this, whatever your father has told you. Sophia withdrew her hand. I'd like you to leave now. We can discuss divorce terms through attorneys. Divorce? James laughed incredulously. After 3 months, over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding when you marry someone under false pretenses, Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. Please leave, or we'll ask the restaurant to escort you out. James stood, straightening his designer tie. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. With that, he turned and strode from the restaurant. Sophia collapsed against me once he was gone, her body shaking with silent sobs. I feel so stupid, she whispered. You're not stupid, I assured her, holding her close. You're kind and trusting, like your mother. Those are beautiful qualities that the right person will treasure, not exploit. As we sat in that restaurant, I felt both profound sadness for my daughter's pain and immense gratitude for Margaret's foresight. Her insistence on financial privacy and careful planning had protected our family's legacy from a predator none of us could have anticipated when she created those safeguards. The road ahead would be difficult, but in that moment, I knew we would navigate it together, just as Margaret would have wanted. The weeks following the confrontation with James were among the most challenging of our lives. Sophia moved temporarily into my guest room, bringing only essential belongings from the apartment she had shared with James. With Grace Williams's guidance, she filed for divorce on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation, a process that promised to be contentious but necessary. True to his threat, James attempted to counter with claims of elder financial abuse, suggesting I had manipulated Sophia against him to maintain control of family assets. His allegations quickly fell apart when faced with the extensive documentation my legal team had compiled, including recordings of his own statements and the professional assessment of my cognitive health that Grace had wisely suggested I obtain months earlier. Through it all, Sophia demonstrated remarkable resilience. Though devastated by the betrayal, she threw herself into teaching, finding solace in her students' uncomplicated affection and the meaningful work she had always loved. In the evenings, we would often sit on the back porch, talking through the pain and gradually rebuilding our relationship, which had been strained by James's subtle efforts to separate us. 2 months after moving home, on a quiet Sunday morning, I decided it was time to share something I had been saving for the right moment. I found Sophia in the garden, tending to the roses Margaret had planted years ago. "I have something for you," I said, sitting beside her on the garden bench. "Something from your mother." Sophia looked up with interest as I handed her an envelope, the paper now slightly yellowed with age. "What is this?" "A letter Margaret wrote for you before she died. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready to know about the inheritance. With everything that happened, it never seemed like the right time until now." With trembling hands, Sophia opened the envelope and began to read her mother's elegant handwriting. "My darling Sophia, if you're reading this, then your father has told you about our financial situation. I'm sorry I couldn't share this with you myself. I've always believed that wealth is a responsibility as much as it is a blessing. We kept this private not to deceive you, but to give you the freedom to become your own person, to find your path without the burden or distraction that significant wealth can sometimes bring. The money itself is just a tool, neither good nor bad. What matters is how it's used. Your father and I have always tried to use it wisely, living simply while securing your future and helping others where we could. I hope you'll continue that tradition in your own way. Remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in love, purpose, and integrity. These are the values I've tried to live by and the legacy I most want to leave you. All my love, Mom." Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she carefully refolded the letter. She knew exactly what to say. Even years later, she whispered, "I miss her so much." "She would be incredibly proud of how you're handling this situation," I assured her. "Your strength, your dignity, it's all Margaret." That evening, over dinner, Sophia and I began a conversation about how to honor Margaret's legacy. "I've been thinking about what Mom wrote about using the money wisely," Sophia said. "I don't need $33 million, Dad, but I do have some ideas about how we might use a portion of it to make a difference." Over the following months, as Sophia's divorce proceedings continued, we worked together to establish the Margaret Harrison Education Foundation, dedicated to supporting innovative teaching programs in underserved communities. Sophia took an active role in developing the foundation's mission while continuing her teaching career, finding healing and creating something positive from such a painful experience. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that day in the restaurant. James, faced with overwhelming evidence of his deception and the ironclad protections around Margaret's estate, eventually accepted a minimal settlement that barely covered his legal fees. The last we heard, he had relocated to another state, presumably to seek new opportunities for his particular brand of financial manipulation. As life gradually returned to normal, I watched my daughter rebuild her confidence and trust in her own judgment. She threw herself into her teaching and the foundation work, finding purpose in continuing her mother's legacy of quiet generosity. A year after the divorce, Sophia was presenting a foundation grant to a local arts education program when she met Daniel, a dedicated art teacher with a gentle manner and genuine passion for helping children express themselves creatively. Unlike James's whirlwind courtship, their relationship developed slowly and naturally over shared values and common interests. When Sophia finally brought Daniel to dinner at my home, the contrast with James could not have been more striking. Daniel asked thoughtful questions about Margaret's photographs on the mantel, listened more than he spoke, and talked enthusiastically about his students' progress rather than his own accomplishments. When the topic of the foundation came up, he expressed admiration for the work, without any hint of calculating interest in the finances behind it. 2 years after her divorce, as I watched Sophia laughing with Daniel in the garden Margaret had created, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since losing my wife. Though the path had been painful, Margaret's foresight and wisdom had protected our daughter when she needed it most. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to remain silent. By keeping quiet about the $33 million when Sophia married James, I had unknowingly protected everything that mattered, not just the money itself, but our daughter's chance at genuine happiness with someone who truly valued her for herself. "We did good, Margaret," I whispered to the garden she had loved so much. "She's going to be okay." The true legacy we leave behind isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the values we instill, the love we share, and the wisdom we pass on to those who follow us. Margaret understood this better than anyone. Her financial acumen created wealth, but her understanding of human nature preserved it. Most importantly, her love and values continue to guide our daughter toward a future filled with authentic happiness and purpose. Have you ever had to keep a secret to protect someone you love? What would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more family stories about love, protection, and wisdom. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for those we love is to trust our instincts, even when the path forward isn't clear.